Originally created for a scrapped point-and-click adventure game Rare Limited was designing, entitled Johnny Blastoff, and not Battletoads, as the rumors insist, the Donkey Kong Country team revived the Kremlings, a militaristic species of crocodilian humanoids, after it was decided they fit in perfectly as the antagonist of the Kong's New World. However, this doesn't mean that Rare has any legal ownership of them, as the rumors insist. No, they've been fully owned by Nintendo since the trademarks and copyrights for Donkey Kong Country were filed. So, K. Rool not appearing for 10 years was not the result of complex legal barriers, but rather grotesque stubbornness, as Nintendo was just convinced they could internally create a wholly original Donkey Kong arch-nemesis that would put K. Rool and his minions to shame. But as their legions of fans can attest, the Kremlings are the perfect counterpart to Donkey Kong and friends. In fact, there's something primordial about a reptilian empire locked in a forever war with a simian civilization. Lizards doing battle with primates is a common trope that's still prevalent everywhere you look. In media like Godzilla vs. King Kong, in the fevered imagination of modern conspiracy theorists, and even in ancient mythology. The ancient Egyptian crocodilian god Sobek was viewed as a deity glorifying the power of the pharaoh, military prowess, and even fertility. And in Lee County, South Carolina, sightings of a vicious lizard man attacking automobiles near the swampland have produced one of modern America's most beloved cryptids. It's likely a healthy fear of the cold-blooded is rooted deep in our genetic memory, from back when our ancestors were all hunter-gatherers and had to be mindful of streams, rivers, and underbrush. But just who are the Kremlings? Where did their species come from? How did they amass such power? And what would have possessed one of the mightiest military and naval forces in Rare's shared universe and Nintendo's multiverse to steal bananas, sending them on a downward spiral that would see the near eradication of their people over a period of 30 years? While they were first introduced in 1994's Donkey Kong Country, and their history fleshed out a bit more in the 1995 Game Boy follow-up Donkey Kong Land, we didn't get an origin story for the Kremlings until Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy's Conquest, released at the end of that year. It was there that we were introduced to Crocodile Isle, DK Island's neighbor just across the sea, and the Kremling homeland. In the instruction manual, the Kremling Lost World, a mysteriously lush and verdant grotto located deep beneath Crocodile Isle, is referred to as the source of the Kremlings, with its center the home of a strange pulsating blue and purple light emanating from a cavern, the interior of which the Kremlings turned into an ancient shrine, the Crocodile Core. If this looks familiar to you, then congratulations! You watched ABC's Lost to the very end. I don't need to explain to you the similarities. And as one of the few people in the world who actually liked the ending to Lost, I feel like I owe it to Donkey Kong Country too. After all, the Kremling source seems to be the same type of mystical earth energy that emanates from its crust as the so-called heart of the island, a source of life, death, and rebirth, and potentially even a wellspring of souls. And no, they weren't dead the entire time. Just like Crow.
Second, like this close to the high score on Donkey Kong.
Beyond it turning this undersea cavern into a font of life, there have been several theories as to how the Kremling source could have given birth to the Kremlings. And while them evolving naturally in this cavern, or just rising up from the light as if it were an otherworldly Stargate, have both been theorized, it's unlikely that the Kremlings are just a bunch of teal'cs. But let us know in the comments if you think the Kremlings are just a bunch of teal'cs. The most widely held interpretation is that exposure to this earth energy changed the evolutionary course of several species native to Crocodile Isle, with the saltwater crocodiles becoming the bipedal, humanoid Kremlings. Now, I'm not going to go down the list and explain how this may have also led to the creation of all of the baddies in the Kremling Krew's employ, or the connection to other similar types of planetary energies seen elsewhere in Rare's shared universe. That comes later. But this Darwinian kickstart was exactly what the Kremlings needed to become the earliest dominant force in the Rare archipelago, the island chain that consists of Crocodile Isle, the DK Isles, Diddy Kong Racing's Timbers Island, and even locations outside of the core Donkey Kong series, like the Banjo-Kazooie series Spiral Mountain and the Ilo Hags, or the Conquer series Willow Woods and the Panther Kingdom, just to name a few. And how do we know that the Kremlings predated the Kongs? By studying the context of these locations and what it implies. In their first appearance in the original Donkey Kong Country, the Kremlings were portrayed as a militaristic force invading Donkey Kong Island to capture DK's beloved hoard of bananas, which are extremely perishable and would likely last around 5 days, but K-Rool probably misplaced his Kroger Plus card. There have been a multitude of theories posited about why the Kremlings wanted the banana hoard, including it being a ploy by K-Rool to starve the Kongs, or to attain the magical properties that seem to be inherent in DK Isle's bananas. But Super Smash Bros. Ultimate provides our first in-game explanation. Kremlings simply love bananas. In truth, we knew very little about the Kremlings in this game, but seizing the bananas seems to have also been a power play by K-Rool, the monarch of a fading empire, striking out and hoping to reignite the dying embers of their past glory. This deep history was hidden in plain sight, if you had the time to analyze the smaller details. Thankfully, I had no friends to bother me by this point in 1994. I lost them all in Waco. Donkey Kong Island is littered with Kremling temples, and littered with Kremling litter, distinguished by the reptilian statues built into the architecture. Every temple stage in the original Donkey Kong Country seems to be of Kremling origin, which differs from the primate-built ruins seen in later games, like Donkey Kong Country Returns and, say it with me, Mario Kart Arcade GP. This is further fleshed out in the Game Boy Advance remake of Donkey Kong Country, which puts a greater emphasis on the temples on the islet just off the coast of Vine Valley, the setting of the famous Orang-Utang Gang stage, as well as Temple Tempest. This DK Isle's territory is what some fans think could be Utan Island, home of Lanky Kong. Only mentioned on the German website for Donkey Kong 64, itself a dubious source for any canon, it would have nevertheless once been part of the greater Kremling Empire, as would have presumably been the entirety of Donkey Kong Island. See, in Donkey Kong Land, we actually got some vital context about these structures. The Kremling temples were part of the Kremling seafaring civilization from antiquity. It wasn't just the Kremling Empire, it was the nation of Kremlantis. The central hub of Kremlantis was an island city in the Rare archipelago, part of today's DK Isles, and the second world of Donkey Kong Land. The instruction manual describes it thus: Kremlantis. This gigantic complex of ancient ruined temples is almost completely submerged. That means that there are plenty of chomps and other biting fish swimming about, waiting to take a piece out of the Kongs. Donkey Kong Land Instruction Manual, page 14. The similarities between Donkey Kong Country's Kremling temples and Donkey Kong Land's Kremlantis are impossible to deny. And if the Kremlantis Empire stretched outward from Crocodile Isle to the city of Kremlantis, and what we'll call Utan Island, and temples were even built on the main Donkey Kong Island, then it does suggest a period of history where the entire DK Isles was Kremling territory. Just as reptiles once ruled the earth before the age of mammals, it seems that the Kremlings predated the Kongs. As an aside, Kremlantis actually appears in the 2001 trailer for Donkey Kong Racing, during the sequence where Diddy and Tiny race on swordfish. While the game eventually amounted to nothing more than a thrilling trailer and some brilliant concepts cooked up at Rare, it definitely seems like the location was at least earmarked, or watermarked, for the game. So the Kremlantis Empire comprised Crocodile Isle and today's DK Isles. But judging from more in-game context, it also plausibly stretched to the sprawling territory known as the Northern Kremisphere. While controlled by the bears of the Rare Archipelago in modern day, the region still maintains strong historical ties to the Kremlings. Why else would so much of it still be named after them? Otherwise, the bears would have to be sporting some serious Kremwood for these crocodile people. Oh yeah, they really raised their Krematoa, if you know what I mean. Oh no! I just blew myself! But if the Kremlings had the leg, and peg leg, up on the Kongs and bears thanks to their early evolution, did they have any chief rivals during this antediluvian age? This is where real-world mythology blends with the Donkey Kong universe, and we go diving off the shores of the Isle o' Hags. It's there where we'll find the remains of another advanced seafaring empire, the famed human civilization of Atlantis, which, let's be honest, the Kremlings probably just totally ripped off. Atlantis was referenced in philosopher Plato's dialogues, viewed by most reputable historians as a fictional allegory, a warning against the audacity of powerful states. According to Plato, Atlantis controlled the entire ancient Western world before succumbing to their hubris when they attempted to conquer Athens. Falling out of favor with the gods, they sank the once proud people to the bottom of the ocean. It wasn't until the 19th century that some scholars seriously considered the possibility that Atlantis was more than a parable and was an actual lost civilization, possibly even the origin of all advanced ancient peoples. While this pseudo-archaeology has no bearing on the actual historical record, and reeks of the racist attitudes of the time, not giving credence to the reality that the immense indigenous civilizations of Africa and the Americas could have been solely responsible for their great works.
Yeah, thanks anyway, Plato.
The legends did spark the imagination of master storytellers throughout the next 14 decades, including the Banjo-Tooie team at Rare, which, no joke, is the first group of creators I think of when I think master storytellers. We know little about the Atlanteans of the DKU, aside from the fact that they used the Greek alphabet and loved taking baths. But one vitally important detail was left behind for us: these mermaid statues. Now, before any of you clownfish in the comments berate me for saying that this is a definite continuity link, and not just the time-strapped Tooie team reusing an art asset from the previous year's Donkey Kong 64, stop being so wiki-brained for the moment, and put yourself in the soggy shoes of this shared universe. If something is portrayed in-game, it should outweigh any authorial intent. After all, Banjo did debut in Diddy Kong Racing as Diddy's friend. Banjo-Kazooie continued the shared world conventions by utilizing Tipped Up the Turtle and a Naughty. And so if statues of the merfolk species seen in Donkey Kong 64 are found in Banjo-Tooie's Atlantis, then this would still be an in-universe connection, whether it was intended by the Tooie team or not. So does this mean that the DKU Atlanteans Were the mer people seen in DK64? Well, I don't think that holds up to scrutiny. Atlantis seems to have been built for the surface world, while the merfolk of Donkey Kong 64 are confined to the waters. And if statues honoring the mer existed in Atlantis, that implies a pre-existing relationship with them. So you couldn't argue that maybe the Atlanteans got exposed to the Kremling source and evolved into fish people. If anything, Seabreeze Cove in Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze seems better suited as the merfolk's central hub in the archipelago, seeing as how it was built for ease of passage for those who already live under the sea. And so if the mer people of Seabreeze Cove were allies of the Atlanteans, that begins painting a vivid picture of the political situation of the early Rare Archipelago. As Atlantis and Kremlantis both fought for control of the archipelago, they no doubt sought to exert their influence on the greater world itself. Just as Plato discussed ships from Atlantis journeying into the Mediterranean Sea to Greece, we know that the Kremlings of antiquity also journeyed from the Atlantic into the Mediterranean, only instead veering south, down the Nile River and into Egypt. And how do we know this? Rare's 2018 shared world pirate game, Sea of Thieves, taking place shortly after the golden age of piracy, has served as something of an omni-prequel to the entirety of Rare's shared universe, and in select cases, even a sequel. Containing explicit references to numerous characters and events, both contemporary to the time of Sea of Thieves and some that appear in prophecies of the future, it's made sure to rope in legends and lore from Banjo-Kazooie, Conquer, Viva Pinata, and much more. And sure, I could sit here all day and all night and talk about the myriad ways Sea of Thieves unites Rare's universe. And that comes later. But I'd rather just discuss how the Kremlings factor into it. Yes, Rare has also provided a few sneaky allusions to Donkey Kong and Sea of Thieves, merely implied for legal reasons, but still capably fleshing out a few surprising areas of lore for the series that the studio soft rebooted in 1994. There's an entire line of ship liveries, weaponry, equipment, and clothing in Sea of Thieves under the Golden Nile classification. Just as Sea of Thieves does to fill out a lot of adjacent history, the text descriptions for these objects give a few cheeky nods to the Kremlings, acknowledging the link between crocodiles and pirates, and even suggesting that they may have crafted the weaponry themselves. But through their lawyerly ambiguous way, the writer of these descriptions helps establish that the Kremlin seafaring empire did make contact with the ancient Egyptians. And if that's the case, could it be that, within the lore of the DKU, they were directly responsible for inspiring the god Sobek? It would also go a long way toward explaining the historical meaning behind this little athletic getup for King K. Rool in Mario Super Sluggers. And again, I'm not saying the creative minds behind Sea of Thieves said, "Hey, we really can't go on with our work on our best-selling, wildly popular online Xbox game until we explain K. Rool's kinky pharaoh costume from a 2008 Nintendo Wii baseball game." But like so much of Rare's shared universe on both sides of the Nintendo Xbox divide, it just all accidentally fits. I love it. It's even possible that the Kremlings encroaching on Egyptian sands was what spurred an earlier Rare hero, say it with me, Imhotep the Wise, to head into the Rare archipelago himself. The historical Imhotep, a physician, chancellor to the pharaoh, and high priest, lived in the 27th century BCE during the 3rd dynasty of Egypt. And he had his own video game developed by Rare's predecessor, Ultimate Play the Game, which was called unambitious drivel by the critics. Terrific. Because of that, Imhotep never made it into rare replay, nor was he ever revived within the DKU like his more successful contemporaries, Saberman and Sir Arthur Pendragon. However, there was a reference to him made in the 2004 Game Boy Advance game Saberwolf, which spun the reimagined Saberman out of his appearance in Banjo-Tooie into an all-new adventure across Ultimatum Island, the setting of many previous Ultimate Play the Game titles. And it was there that we learned of the Temple of Imhotep, ruins that were, according to the locals, part Mayan, part Egyptian. Nobody knows why. Now, the widespread Maya period that most are familiar with stretched from late antiquity, around 250 CE, to 1697. This Mesoamerican society existed for quite a long time, but it postdates the historical Imhotep by nearly 3,000 years. However, the earliest traces of Maya civilization, located in modern-day Belize, have been carbon dated to around 2600 BCE, towards the end of the Third Dynasty of Egypt, precisely the time of Imhotep. Now, these radiocarbon dates are viewed as controversial by most archaeologists, with the mainstream opinion being that it's off by as much as 1400 years. But what if it's not? Could Imhotep have traveled from Egypt, through the rare archipelago, all the way across the Atlantic into the Caribbean Sea, just south of the entrance to the Sea of Thieves, and to Central America, touching base with the peoples he met along the way, before bringing his acquired knowledge back, building temples in the archipelago as a line of defense against the Kremlantians? Not only would this explain the Temple of Imhotep, which would even inspire the settlers of Ultimatum to start a cult in its name, but we also know another Maya-inspired civilization would be established on the Isle of Hags, while there are numerous pockets of Egyptian-themed influences elsewhere, such as Gobi's Valley. But if Imhotep was sailing the Atlantic looking for allies against the Kremlings, did the Kremlings respond in kind? Did they make contact with any other civilizations around the world, other than the Egyptians? It gets a bit murkier from here, and this goes well beyond the era of Kremlantis. But it is worth noting that the Greco-Roman influence of the Kremlantis temples gave way to a decidedly more Aztec flavor in Puzzling Pyramid and Kongazuma's Castle, the Kremling temples seen in the Congo jungle in Paon's peg-swinging classic, DK, King of Swing. Kongazuma, a Kremling statue brought to life, even has a name derived from Montezuma, but considering that the Aztec Empire dates to the 14th century to 1521, this is all starting to get a bit off topic. And just like the Maya, there are several suspicious Aztec-inspired civilizations across the DKU, so we'll save this exploration for another time. Eventually, Atlantis fell. Whether or not this was the doing of the Kremlings, or they really just pissed off the Lord of Games, as Plato suggested, is unknown. But while this would briefly leave the Kremlantians as perhaps the most powerful force in the ancient world, the Kremlings would find new opposition from within their domain, from two new insurgent races: the primates of the future Donkey Kong Islands, and the bears of the Northern Kremisphere. Kremlantis met a similar fate to Atlantis, becoming partially submerged in the ocean, while their sphere of influence dramatically shrank, getting pushed out of their DK Isles territory. While it's unclear when the Kremlings were first driven out of the Northern Kremisphere, the Crimean War, mentioned in Donkey Kong Country 3, despite being named after the real-world campaign in the 1850s, seems to have been a recent conflict in relation to DKC 3, seeing as how Brigadier Bazooka Bear fought in it and all, perhaps more analogous with the Vietnam War, as the Four Koma manga kingdom's DKC3 adaptation depicted, or maybe even the 1982 Falklands War. Crimea has never been established as a location in the DKU, but we've also never seen the full boundaries of the Northern Hemisphere, so it's likely to be a peninsula there, with the Kremlings launching an invasion to reclaim some of the territory that used to fall under the purview of Kremlantis. Because Kremlantis had no more claimed territory, the Kremlings were pushed all the way back to Crocodile Isle. Aside from the sunken remains of its capital city, Kremlantis was but a memory, and the Kremlings' days as a colonizing force were at an end, with their monarchy holding claim over nothing but their homeland, and later some industrial factories they would build in disputed regions. But what was it that gave the simians of Donkey Kong Island that divine spark? What caused their evolution to catch up to the Kremlings, where they could overthrow their occupiers and reclaim their Donkey Kong lands as their own? Well, explaining how it was likely the arrival of Tiki Tong and the formation of the first iteration of the Tiki Tak tribe that turned the apes and monkeys of the rare archipelago into the Kongs would take far too long, and I lost most of you when I started talking about Imhotep. So the history of the Tiki Tak tribe comes later. In the very next installment of DKU Lore Tour.